Good evening. My name is Larry Robin. I'm the director of the Moonstone Art Center. The series we've been doing here at PhillyCAM is called Mentor and Mentored. And the idea is how art, how poetry gets transferred from generation to generation. How can you take something so personal and teach it to somebody? Or how do you teach someone to be willing to expose their souls? Because in order to reach the truth, you have to open yourself up, which is very hard. It's very scary. And how does a teacher do that? And how does a student allow that participate in this exercise of searching for the truth? Because that's what art does. And that's what poetry does in words. So this has been a very interesting series. This, I think, is our 9th presentation here at PhillyCAM. And it's just been very exciting each time. Tonight, we have Nzadi Kita. She's a Philly-born writer, editor, scholar, and teacher. Her first book of poems, Birthmarks, documents a generation of African Americans who migrated from the rural South to the urban North. She has received grants from the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts for Poetry and the Leeway Foundation for Scholarship. Poet Laureate Journal most recently published Kita's works. Her poems have also appeared in anthologies, including Peace is a Haiku Song, A Face to Meet the Faces, an anthology of contemporary persona poetry, Confirmation, an anthology of African American women, and The Ringing Ear, Black Poets Lean South. She has worked on projects with the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, WHYY, and Philadelphia Mural Arts Program, all of which are incredible organizations. So it's my pleasure to introduce Nzadi Kita.
Thank you. So I'm going to start by reading. That's okay. And I thought I would read a range of work. So some older things, some newer things. This poem is starting to get old, but I hope it's still a pleasure. This poem is called The Avenue. It came about as a result of living in Germantown and being invited to write a poem about Germantown. And there's a series of them. This is one of them, the first one. Raise your head to what dances above the eyes. Time reeling out, time ticking, time flapping like film. On my way somewhere else, I stepped into this mirror. I see everything multiplied. My eyes to the glass bowl of the world, feet testifying to ages that came before, my head spinning young voices, the kind you hear in celebration, green as a cool walk down a summer street toward the sound of your voice, brother, a razor humming, the smoothness of silver clips, Billy Eckstine humming the smell of Friday nights as the daytime of me washes down the sink, as if according to plan, according to your voice, sister, explaining it all in contralto measures from that solitary window, your steadfast singing visited on us. You, sister, leaving your floral trace folded in a southern way, your beautiful blues, your years of walking add up to days on our street, your train of petals. You, brother, in the caramel chair at Pomona Street, hands still in the barber's silver world, hands free in lion play, your steps in time, your silent strings, playing momentary music up through tongues and jackets. So there's a second part to this poem called The Avenue that came from standing at the corner of Germantown Avenue and Shelton and seeing a man in a pair of glasses, mirror sunglasses, that seemed to be an iconic figure standing there at the corner. And this poem came from looking at him. Whose prayer is this, painted over ghost words? Who's got the keys to these blind windows? Who can see simply because of sight? What if I see myself, scrap iron waiting for a red light, the world passing me by without comment? Which burdens will fix me? Which ones will I set down? What do you make of me in the mirror now, on my way somewhere? I've got another poem. This is a poem I never read, and it's from a manuscript that has been around a long time waiting for its moment. It hasn't had its moment yet. This is a poem that sort of marks a point in time. It's called 12-Year-Old Boy. The 12-year-old boy is 25 now. So it's dated, but it needed to be written at the time. 12-year-old boy. Clocks and months and deadlines scroll uphill. I cannot stop their virus rule over his bones or his pivotal reach. Lashes low rolling forward, I cannot stop this storm, the ocean breeding it, or shape the shores that wait to answer. Shoulders intent, harboring a secret, a mandate in the world of men. Questions converge. I cannot stop their sour sugar. Thank you. I'm going to move on to a more recent poem. This poem was collected in a book called Bum Rush the Page, a deaf poetry jam. It's been out for some time, maybe 10 years or more. And this poem started with an image of Amiri Baraka, and so I want to dedicate the poem to Amiri Baraka rather permanently. The last time I saw Amiri Baraka, I delivered this poem, so it's kind of appropriate to read it again now that he's on the other side. The poem is called Rapid Transit. Someone lights a saxophone and the marvelous breath of God sweeps the subway. In my head, I hear Baraka return the symphonic burst, run in color all across the steps of history, calling tunes and changes till nothing remains what we want to believe. Subway becomes elevator, scatting till the floor drops out. The sax, a giant key, tune in the player's hands. The suspended world shakes itself and rolls over, pedals and machine parts flashing till they sputter and catch or spark and die. As Baraka leans back in, riffing the brass idiom, narrating our bestial beginnings to mad modernity and on through the channels of space. Inside sound, I cling to the axis, vulnerable to speed, but I must love the ride. Otherwise, the word would not invade this body so. Thank you. Now am I going to introduce? I'm going to call up Tracy Ferdinand, who is a former student of mine, who graduated from Ursinus College in 2007, from the English department, I might add. We're very proud of our English graduates. And Tracy's going to read some of her work.
Good night. And Dr. Kada, thank you so much for inviting me. So I took Dr. Kada's narrative poetry writing class the spring of my senior year at Ursinus College. And so that was 2007. And before Dr. Kada's class, I'd never taken a poetry writing class or a poetry writing workshop. So at the time, I didn't really consider myself a poet. A writer, yes, absolutely, but I was mostly comfortable with prose. And so I'd written poems, but they weren't really polished work. And I usually applied the quote, "Writing is rewriting," to my prose, not my poetry. I really thought that poetry was something better left to the Gwendolyn Brookses of the world. So I think the narrative course description in front of the poetry, that's what drew me to sign up for the course. And it really helped me to feel more comfortable with the idea of writing poetry because, I said to myself, well, Tracy, I can write a story. So I was pursuing a BA in English, and I'd been reading stories all my life, so a good narrative was something I was familiar with, something I was comfortable with. And so I took her course, and I can say I'm really glad that I did. And so what did I learn? Well, there were a lot of important things, mechanics, getting rid of the passive voice, but there are really 3 crucial and general lessons that I want to talk about because I still carry those lessons with me today. So I'll share those as I read my poems. Okay, so the first lesson I learned is that poetry doesn't have to be intimidating. The second lesson I learned is that the poem doesn't have to be enigmatic. And then the third lesson I learned is that telling a story, the narrative, that's very important to connecting with an audience. Okay, so for the first lesson, Dr. Kada's class helped me to get rid of the intimidation I felt towards poetry. And in the classroom setting, poetry writing was something you could ease into with exercises. So we would have free write sessions or a themed memory session, and these exercises helped you tease out an idea and really produce something that you could work with later on and shape into a poem. So these were the tools she used to help get the students started. And in terms of writing and getting rid of the intimidation, it was also important to have a published poet teaching the course because, here you were sitting in a circle with someone who actually did the work, someone who could guide you along. And so with Dr. Kada, you could visit her on campus, sit in her office, soak up the vibes, and, you knew someone who practiced the craft. And so she wasn't just someone on the page, she was someone who did the work. She was accessible and a poet in the flesh. And so that's really important because you get to really see and interact with someone who produced, work. And I think even the quality of her voice is poetic. I think she speaks in this beautiful rhythm. It's got a poetic aesthetic to it. No? Well, okay. Well, maybe it's just me thinking about her reading poetry, but, and then you would put on these Poem-palooza events every year and have slam teams. So she would celebrate the stage poet as well as the page poet. And also, this is really important, you invited Sonia Sanchez to campus so students could sit with her and we ate with Sonia Sanchez, and she's a prolific writer, and so that was really an honor. So making poetry more accessible really helped. And in terms of having a mentor, it doesn't really have to always be direct counsel either. There are things that the student will pick up on, and that helps you understand how an experienced poet moves through the world, and then what sort of things help them build and informs their craft. So, for example, I specifically remember you describing a film that you didn't watch in entirety, and I think it was Amistad, but I will never forget that because I was really struck by the fact that you're a deeply feeling person and you pay close attention to detail, and images have a really profound impact on you, and so that's one of the a quality of a good poet is someone who can observe, pay attention to detail, and someone who is in touch and someone who allows themselves to be moved by an idea. So essentially, the first lesson I learned was that poetry doesn't have to be intimidating, and being around someone whose life work was writing and teaching, that really helped me form a bridge between the poems I read and then the poems I felt I was capable of producing as well. So I'm going to read one poem I wrote before her class. Love Letter for Howard. Dear Howard, I miss you. Sifting through thoughts on the first day we met, I still marvel at your metro swag, chucks and ties, talented 10th t-shirts, caught up from day one. You had me sitting on the yard every day just looking at your brown, my heart overflowing with all your beautiful brown. I swear I could see your history behind your walls. You couldn't hide it. Your story behind those walls, Howard, you couldn't hide it. I used to be a cynic, didn't believe in love, but you schooled me on the true meaning of black on black love, had me scribbling lyrics on napkins and lines on my lifelines because you are spoken word, the black aesthetic, hip hop, womanism, intellectual warfare. You challenged me to see myself, really know myself. You helped me author my identity. I birthed a daughter from your seed. I named her Tracy Coretta. She came out holding her left fist toward tomorrow, with eyes burning into today, into yesterday. After I left you, you were always on my mind. When I hear your name, my soul smiles, even though we're no longer together. I love you, Howard. I thank you, Howard University. And so I wrote that after completing a semester at Howard University, and it was really a wonderful experience for me. So I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, and so when I moved to the US, I lived in the suburbs. So moving to the Mecca, DC, was really a life-changing event for me because I hadn't been around so many Trinidadians at once. So that was a product of that experience. And so the next poem, this one I wrote while taking her course. And I think that I wrote this after reading an essay by Alice Walker. And a little backstory, I grew up with my grandmother in Tobago. And even though my grandmother didn't have any formal training, she was an artist. I think the term used now is folk art. And she would create the most beautiful things. She would see images everywhere. And so one of my favorite pieces, she made a doll dress from seashells, covered the dress in seashells, and she gardened too. So, that's an art form in itself. But I think this poem was inspired by a memory exercise and then reading that Alice Walker essay. For my grandmother, Tanti's signature. Hands blessed with agency, tilled earth uncompromisingly black as the hue that danced across her skin. She sang and let lyrics fall sacredly into each bed. She planted life songs. Crops bursting with wisdom grew where her songs were buried. Eyes graced with a gift of seeing secrets carefully hidden studied mango trees. When spirits moved through leaves, she heard each word. Her soul spoke through her art. A doll dress adorned with confetti-covered seashells, flowers grown from varnished mahogany fruit, a mosaic of bright painted split peas and fluttering butterfly wings gave lift to jumby beads. Tanti waited on spurts moving through the leaves of mango trees. Tanti found things, carefully hidden things. She taught us how to plant life songs. Have I harvested wisdom? So this next one doesn't really have a title. We be malapropping and popping verbs in place of nouns, locking definitions in Pandiqua's box, because we knows what Twain didn't knows. Language real political. We language though lounge law like privileged poetry. We language kiss, kick teeth in, peel and skin off, pulpify muscles. Your language gauge the man, eh? Your language gauges the man. And I think I wrote that, I think there was a dance instructor who was visiting at Ursinus at the time, I think, pop locking instructor. So I think that was inspired by him as well. Okay, and so the second lesson is that a poem doesn't have to be enigmatic to be a good poem. And so there can be complexity and layers of meaning, but the poem can be simple in terms of the language and still be profound if I take the time to use the right words. And the third lesson I learned was that the story is very important. And the class gave me a greater appreciation for the narrative embedded in the poem. And we all love a good story, so it's how we make sense of the world. And so this last one is titled, On Meeting Lamont B. Steptoe. Eager to hear a whirlwind traveling man read and baptize my spirit in the word, I arrive early, take an elevator up to the sky floor, then sit, waiting for a congregation. Steptoe hands me a flyer for an art gallery show, asks me where I'm from. Trinidad, Tobago, New Jersey. It's crazy down there in Trinidad. Drugs, kidnappings, rotting youth overripe with potential, spoiling in sun. Asks me, how big is Tobago? As deep as Calypso? As wide as your grandmother's feet? Thank you.
Tracy talked about stories, and yeah, I remember that class. Just to speak a minute about the teaching aspect, I wouldn't be a writer, and I certainly wouldn't be a teacher without the example that I learned in Sonia Sanchez's poetry workshop during the year of, I think that was 78, 79, somewhere in there, at Temple University. I basically learned how to teach from watching Sonia and being in her class. But I also learned how to teach by writing. So I do like to help students relax around poetry, which I was kind of surprised to learn that students are generally nervous and anxious about poetry. So one of the things that I always do is that we talk about baggage, and people get to talk about the kind of baggage they're bringing, what they think poetry is. I make them go out and find a poet that they like and come back and talk about that work and why they like it, and that sort of opens up a channel for them to think about what kind of poet they want to be. And then I also like to ply students with questions. One of my favorite questions to have students write about for a few minutes is could you live without music? And people usually have a lot to say about that. So, just getting people in a questioning mode, encouraging them to stay in a questioning mode, telling them little funny personal stories of mine and provoking them to do the same, and sort of helping them to find the language and the image in there that that opens them up to want to do that more as part of my strategy. Anyway, I'm just going to read one poem that is part of quite a long story that I find myself telling in poems right now. There's a book underway called Brief Evidence of Heaven, and it came from, I was teaching a class at Westchester University, and I decided it was a research class, and I decided that students needed to know more about American slavery, and so I had them read the narrative of Frederick Douglass. When I read the book over again myself, I stuck on a particular line, and it's the sentence in which he says that he talks about escaping, and he says that his wife joined him in New York after he arrived in New York, and they were married shortly after. And I started wondering who Frederick Douglass's wife was and what it would be like to be Frederick Douglass's wife. And this was pre-internet. The internet was young, put it that way. And so it wasn't as easy to find these things out. But I went to Westchester's library and pulled out all the books on him and looked at the index to see if there was anything about his wife. Very little. Well, as it turns out, many years later, many poems later, 2 years of research later, I wrote a book of persona poems that's based on the life of Anna Mary Douglass. And so this is what the book is called, Brief Evidence of Heaven. So a persona poem is a poem in which you take on, as the poet, you take on the voice of your subject. You're not really writing as I, even when you use the first person pronoun. So I'm just going to read the one of the poems, kind of a very central poem from this collection. It's called History, and it starts with a quote from Rosetta Douglass Sprague. Rosetta Douglass Sprague was Anna Mary Douglass and Frederick Douglass's oldest daughter and oldest child. She's one of the reasons I was able to put the poems together, because she's really the only person who's written any kind of sustained factual narrative of her mother's life. So one of the things she said in that booklet was, "It was no unusual occurrence for mother to be called up at all hours of the night, cold and hot as the case may be, to prepare supper for a hungry lot of fleeing humanity." Unquote. We will be something more than we are now. Our crumbled days and nights, our saddest parts will mix like ash and dirt, kept secret, pounded down by traveling feet. Some later man will cry some rugged song in praise to Douglass, write the sun up as he used to do, then walk a while with God, but never knowing, walk in the leaves, trampling afternoon. His thoughts will tumble, words all dressed in flags and velvet, swelling up like boils, jumping to his feet, pretending he is Douglass, struck by Covey, spitting fire. And when the writer turns to me, what shape will fill his mouth? How many pages will he need for laundry, heaping plates, and croup that breaks at dawn, to heed the mark of my account? Will it be said that I could speak, seal cracks, and years from now, who will remember bread and stew that set those bound to Canada on their feet? 400 buried shackles in my garden. Will he paint across my truth 100 years from now, or hush me silent on a page that reads, "The wife of an important man"? So now I would like to introduce our second poet, who is Sania Douglass. Sania is a junior at Ursinus College in the English department. And she's quite an accomplished poet. She came to us an accomplished poet and continues to write as she moves through her program. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Sania.
Like Dr. Kata said, I'm a junior at Ursinus and an English major, kind of on the track towards secondary education certification. I guess I did come to Ursinus as a poet. Not very, well, I guess kind of celebrated. I had first started writing poetry in the 9th grade. I remember I was at lunch and I was kind of just wandering the halls a little bit, not knowing what to do with my time. And I looked into the classroom and a bunch of kids were just sitting on the carpet and like reading out of books. And I was like, oh, I wonder what they're doing in there. So I kind of just wandered in there and became a part of the poetry club. And for a long time, I just sit on YouTube and like look up Def Poetry Jam poems and just like admire those poets and be like, oh, I want to do that one day. So I kind of really just came into writing through like slam poetry and performance and didn't take too much time to sit down and read. I was just always more fascinated with the spoken word. So eventually, I became part of a program here in Philly called the Philly Youth Poetry Movement and traveled a little bit around the city at youth open mics and adult open mics and just kind of like just fostered a deeper sense for the spoken word. But eventually, I started researching older poets and looking at poetry books and kind of trying to find more appreciation for the written word, because I guess I had ran through all the Def Poetry Jam videos I could, but also we had a poetry course in high school, so that kind of steered me in that direction a little bit. But I think I'll start with this poem that I wrote for a friend. I was kind of joking when I told him I'd write him a poem, but he actually took me serious, so I had to write it. But here it is. It's 2 a.m. I've always imagined writing poetry under candlelight, but all I've got in this cramped 2-bedroom apartment is the dim glare of a laptop screen. Donny Hathaway plays in the background. While I read Bukowski and comb through old crates for an Annie DeFranco book I haven't seen in ages, I need inspiration. I have no sweet, sinewy lines, no rhymes or poems that have been dying to be written, just a list of thank yous, the kind you offer when the moon has been tucked in and the only noise is the sound of whistling leaves and breathing. So consider this a thank you note. For the melody in your feet, the way you swing music around torso through loopholes of rhythm, you dance like David, like Davis blowing his trumpet, the jazz in your bones tear down stereotypes of black men dancing like the walls of Jericho. You dance language. Your language be movement when you spit, your words be oil popping in a skillet, not angry but electric. Thank you for your voice and velvet tongue. Your pen be still storm soaring through the open mic as I sit waiting for just a drop of your story, just wanting to know your story. Thank you for introducing me to James Blake, for reminding me that the world has seen my brothers do enough breaking, for the worship in your laugh, caramel cobblestone chest, broad brick shoulders. Thank you for the poppy store trips in search of chicken cheesesteaks, which we never got. Consider this a Thanksgiving. As I bow my head, close my eyes, and thank God for your smile, 1,000 doves in the morning sky. Like fireflies swarming in mason jars, I've been captured in your ocean and the message of strength and love it carries. But this is Philly. There are no oceans. Just 2 rusted rivers in a sewage system to send letters in empty 40 bottles and hope that it reaches a new friend on a crowded Broad Street subway. Let's see. Thank you. I think when I did start moving a little bit away from spoken word and started reading a little bit more, I read a lot of poets like Lucille Clifton, and I actually just started reading anything I could get my hands on, whether it was newspapers or magazines or novels. I started reading a lot of Toni Morrison. What else? A lot of writers from the Harlem Renaissance, just wanting to gain a deeper appreciation for the written word. And I still did a lot of spoken word, though. But one thing that I really got interested in was memoir writing. My freshman year, I think it was spring semester, I took Dr. Cater's memoir writing class, and it just totally blew my mind because I had never really been introduced to memoir. Like, we had always learned about autobiography and everything, but memoir was something that just fascinated me because I guess the way I interpret it was memoir was a story from a life and not like the story of a life. Like, you could just take a random moment from someone's life and write pages and pages upon it and just get so in detail. So I think I'll read a piece from that. I think I included this in my final assignment that we did. No matter where I go, I always find myself missing home. In 2010, I went to Los Angeles, stepped outside of LAX, and fell in love with the 75-degree weather, the palm trees and pink one-story houses with prickly green lawns. I brought burritos from brown-skinned men in street trucks and ate burgers at the Jack and the Box around the corner from Occidental College. In 2011, I went to the Bay Area, stepped off the BART train in Berkeley, and was met by homeless people and the stench of weed. I walked around Berkeley with my hands in my pockets, always staying aware of pickpocketers. I rode the San Francisco trolleys and walked up and down the steep streets in Chinatown. I saw Lombard Street and the Golden Gate Bridge. After the Bay Area, I went to Des Moines and saw nothing. Just green fields and farm animals. I went to the Iowa State Fair and saw the Confederate flags and men in overalls eat fried pickles and butter. I honestly believe Iowa has nothing to offer. I love the easiness of Cali, the beautiful people and 24-hour breeze, but there's something about home. After each trip, when the plane began to lower, and I saw the Comcast building in City Hall, I smiled. I hate the violence, harsh winters, and humid summers, but I love home. I can't wait to leave it, but a part of me always misses it. How could I see the beauty of the West Coast and still want Philly with its polluted rivers and absence of palm trees and beaches? It doesn't make sense, but my Philly be special. My Philly be different. Summer nights and jam-packed open mic joints, places where sage burns in ashtrays, where the lights are low and butter-brown men and women gather in worn love seats or carpets, snapping their fingers to lines of poetry. Places like Art Nouveau or First Fridays, where hippies line up along 2nd Street and Old City to lay down the artwork along with their burdens. They sell handcrafted jewels and seashell necklaces while watching a group of teens beatbox and break dance. My Philly be different. Block parties and barbecue, boys riding ATVs down Point Breeze Ave with no helmets and doing wheelies. Playground fistfights and basketball games. Mr. Softy trucks and the old heads with the wooden water ice cart and rusty bells. My Philly be different. Icy winters, Christmases without heat, Barbie dolls and Tonka trucks wrapped in aluminum foil. Mommy knew how to make something out of nothing, months of heating up bath water in large bowls in the microwave. Hurry up and bathe before it gets cold. We knew how to make something out of nothing. I was born and raised in Philadelphia. I know how to make something out of nothing. I think the direction that my writing is going in now is a little bit different than when I first started out. Well, I don't get to write as much as I'd like to anymore because of school. I'm busy writing papers about Shakespeare and other things now, but I still very much consider myself a poet, even though I probably haven't written a poem in months, but I know one day I'll get back to it, and I know that the things that I've learned in my high school poetry club and the Philly Youth Poetry Movement and Dr. Kata's class all go towards that. And I know that one day I want to teach poetry, and I think that that's something every child should experience, no matter what age it comes to them. I think it's something that everybody should at least get exposed to, because just me wandering into my high school's poetry club has just changed my life tremendously. Like, I've got to travel to all these different places because of art, and I'd like to offer that to somebody else one day. Thank you.
Listening to Sania made me remember the fact that somebody asked me on the way in, how did I start writing, or something like that. And I said, I was 13, and it was the summer, and I didn't have anything else to do. I was too old to play double dutch in the street, because there's a certain point at which, you know, when you get your woman body, double dutch is a little uncomfortable to play. And I was too young to work. I really wanted a job, but I was too young to work. So I was casting around the house, and there were only 4 stations, TV stations back then, 99 years ago. And I turned on, there was nothing on the regular channels, and I made a valiant attempt to get channel 12, which did not have good reception then, just to see what was on. And lo and behold, I saw this woman with this huge afro, little short woman, big black eyes, staring into the camera, and the opening line of her poem was, "The first day I shot dope was on a Sunday. I was mesmerized." And I sat down to listen to Sonia Sanchez for the first time, to see her for the first time, and went to the black bookstore, found her book, cost $1 from Broadside Press. Her first book was out, Homecoming. And I read the book. I didn't understand a lot of the book, but I knew there was something in that book for me, and there was something in that work for me. And I stumbled up on a poem, I think it's called Personal Letter Number 3, that starts, "Nothing will keep us young, you know." And I was young then, and even at that, there was something about that opening line that just reached out of the page and grabbed me and shook me. And so it's quite an honor to be somebody who has offered poetry to other people, and then to hear students talking about offering poetry to other people so that lineage continues. Because, I think especially when you're young, but at any age, we carry around a lot of things we never say. And that's really what poems are there for, to bring us to those places. I'm going to read again from some shorter ones from my Brief Evidence of Heaven manuscript. And these are, again, persona poems written in the voice of Anna Murray Douglas. She was Frederick Douglass's first wife of 2. She was the one who went for the long haul. They were married for 44 years. And they had 5 kids. And their youngest child died when she was 10. Her name was Annie. So there's a lot of imagination in the course of this collection, because there's very little written about this woman. So I took what I knew and I, forged a way in between. So I imagine that Annie and Anna Mary Douglas might have been in the kitchen together at some point, and that the mother might have told the youngest daughter stories. And so I have a poem or two that reflects those stories. This one is called Anna's Story While Shelling Peas, Rochester, 1853. Birds make flowers what they are. It's what they came to do. Their singing holds the recipe for every one and tells the rain how much will make geraniums so wild for red. Why the only way to keep the world in lilac and wisteria is a fine, faint rain. What makes the jay and mockingbird almost as decent as bees is what those two keep quiet. Without white petals quilted in their speech, thunderstorms would only mean muck, would only mean water slapping heavy-handed. No camellia, no daisies, no dogwood or magnolia. Thank you. And then there's another one I could imagine. Anna Mary Douglas was a baker. She was known for her yummy treats from the oven. And I could imagine them in the kitchen baking something or making a pie crust. And this one is called Anna's Story While Rolling Dough, 1854. So this is the mother talking to the daughter. Once clouds learn their true names, they find them too long for keeping. Clouds send their names away to angels tied with twine. Always busy churning and setting things right, angels take up the bundles, grind them from paste to white water. Making milk is the work of angels. Drink it, girl. We carry the blessing of clouds in us, what goats and cows are born knowing. Okay, I think I'll make my last one, since I'm writing about Anna Mary Douglas and her family members. This last one is about her father. His name was Bambara Murray. After driving the mule, after taking his place in its track, he stopped at the door. Each time stepped in as if he never had, and spread his arms like a star, alive for his arrival, who thought chains meant he was dead. Raised from water, made from hard sun and green roots and tough stems, drunk on blue marsh tides, my father returns by his name, Bambara, to my shores. Bambara, to these unshamed mountains dark as God. How they would have pleased him. He rides down this air they've sent to sweep out summer, to leave me as I left him, quit dry, cast in the pines, lean back on those shiny white feet. Learn it if it's yours to learn, he said. Don't let wants make you foolish, girl, he said. Wait, he said, while I made up my bag. Wait for a husband. To go out on your own, yourself, no good, no good. His only celebration is his name. I sang it into each child's ear before knives made us two. Mornings I find his name, stirring in my sleep, alive. At times I call it loud, Bambara, who wore days that crushed him to powder, who washed it all down with laughter. Bambara, who carried his old body like a spear, who squatted in the pines, singing the old words, who wore that cast iron throat, once skinned by rope. What's left now to prove his grace in a sour world? What music climbs the low hills to answer? Bambara, Bambara. My father was a great man. Why is it no one followed him with praise or flower garlands? No one wrote him down. Thank you.
I'll put a plug in for our big annual event, Poetry Inc. Our 18th annual Poetry Inc. comes up on April 6th this year. 7 hours of poetry and food and discussion and camaraderie, and it's just a wonderful event, and it's open to everyone. So if you look at our website, you can get information on it. And the second Tuesday of every month, we're here at PhillyCAM with Menard and Menard. And I just want to thank everybody, especially Anzadi. Thank you all.